My boyfriend told me I couldn't be alone with my dad anymore because the way he looks at you is inappropriate, and if you keep entertaining it, then that's emotional cheating. When I confronted him about twisting normal family moments into something sick, he smirked and said, "No normal woman is that close to her father." I just stared at him. That was 9 months ago. This morning, he was crying in my DMS from prison. I was at Target with my dad, helping him pick out a houseplant for his hospital room when my phone buzzed with a text from my BF. "We need to talk." That night, over dinner, he broke the news. "I don't want you alone with your father anymore. The way he looks at you is inappropriate, and if you keep entertaining it, then that's emotional cheating." I sighed. But here's the thing. I'm usually the type to go along with everything. Avoid conflict, keep the peace even if it means letting people walk all over me. Not ideal, but just the way I roll. Except my dad, the man I love most in this world, just got diagnosed with cancer. Prostate. He starts treatment next month and I need to be there for him, which meant I needed Oscar out. But I couldn't just break up with him, because before him, I'd been single for 2 years. And if I ended another relationship at 28 years old, I'd never hear the end of it from my family. What did you do wrong this time? They'd never believe the truth about what he said about Dad. So I chose war and smiled. "You're right, my love. I'll be more careful. Thanks for looking out for me." That idiot ate up every word. Week 1 was subtle. I declined Dad's coffee invite, claimed I had work. Oscar seemed pleased with my obedience, his ego inflating with each missed meetup. Dad texted asking if everything was okay. I left him on red. I hated myself for it. Week 2, escalation began. Told Mom I couldn't help with Dad's treatment prep. Oscar thinks we spend too much time together. Mom's confusion spread through the family group chat like wildfire. I stayed vague, supportive. He's just protective. Week 3, the real show started. Grandma's birthday. Dad approached to ask about my promotion. I jolted up and pretended to panic while grabbing Oscar's arm. He dragged me away. Relatives noticed. Whispers started. Sunday dinner became my stage. Dad asked if I wanted him to pass salad. I pretended to flinch. "Oscar, is this okay? Is this safe?" Silence. My sister's eyes gleamed with what looked like understanding. The masterpiece was my Google Calendar. Dad's safe zones color-coded for whether my father would attend each family event. Invited Oscar's entire extended family to view it. Then came the breaking point. At one of the family barbecues hosted at my house, my aunt asked where Dad was. In front of everyone, I announced, "Oscar made me realize Dad has romantic feelings for me, so I had to cut contact for everyone's safety." The silence was deafening. My sister Olivia's eyes went wide. "What?" My aunt gasped. Oscar noticed things I didn't. The way Dad hugs me, looks at me, it's all very sexual. Oscar went pale. "That's not exactly what You're so protective," I gushed, squeezing his hand. But my facade didn't last long, because soon I felt his nails start digging into my arm, and I recognized its meaning instantly. Shut up or get hit. I forced myself to form a smile. "JK, guys, we just have a weird sense of humor. Dad couldn't make it because he has chemo today." I felt 10 pairs of eyes burning into me, but I kept up the charade and even kissed Oscar on the cheek. I hated how quickly they believed me. But apparently, not everyone was fooled, because the next morning, me and Oscar woke up to pounding on the front door. Oscar's mom and sister burst through like a storm hitting the coast. "Where is he?" Oscar appeared. Slap. The sound of his mom's slap against his cheek echoed through the entire apartment. "Lol. You told her that her father wants her romantically?" Jim called me sobbing. Sobbing. "What is wrong with you? She's twisting everything." I just said what exactly? That fathers can't love their daughters? That family affection is sexual? What? Oscar exploded. "He texts her goodnight. They get coffee every week. Go shopping together. It's weird. That's called having a DAD," his sister yelled. "No normal woman is that close to her father. I set a boundary and a sick, twisted boundary." His mom looked disgusted. "She isolated herself from her father because of your BS." Oscar kept ranting about inappropriate dynamics, about boundaries, about how nobody understood what he saw. The more he talked, the worse he sounded. His family stared in horror at the monster they'd never noticed before. His mom grabbed my hand. "Pack your things. Now." In the car, his sister turned to me with tears in her eyes. He did this to his last 3 girlfriends. Olivia, Monica, Kate, all had inappropriate dads according to him. She paused. I never believed those girls. Until now. My blood ran cold. 3. Oscar's mom gripped the wheel. I failed raising him. "No," I said, thinking of Dad starting chemo soon. He showed me who he was. I just made sure everyone else saw it too. That's when I felt my phone buzz. It was Oscar again. He sent me a video and I instantly recognized it. It was the tape from our 3rd month together, back when I still trusted him. "You think you won, but you forgot I had this." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. The video thumbnail showing me in Oscar's bed from back when I still trusted him, and Helen must have noticed something was wrong because she pulled into the nearest parking lot and turned around in her seat. Rachel leaned over and gently took my phone from my trembling fingers, her face going pale as she recognized exactly what Oscar had sent, and I watched her jaw clench the same way it had when she'd mentioned Monica earlier. Helen asked what he'd sent, but I couldn't form the words, my throat closing up as I thought about that video going public, going to my work, my family seeing it, and Rachel answered for me, telling her mom it was an intimate video from early in our relationship. The car went silent for about 3 seconds before Helen slammed her hand on the steering wheel and said we were going straight to the police, that Minnesota had strict revenge porn laws, and they'd both testify about Oscar's pattern with his exes. Rachel pulled up the law on her phone, showing me it was a gross misdemeanor, that Oscar could face jail time, and I felt this weird mix of relief and terror as Helen started the car again and headed toward downtown Minneapolis. At the police station, Officer Janet Williams led me to a small interview room while Helen and Rachel waited outside, having already given their statements about Oscar's history with Monica and Kate. I struggled through the details, explaining how Oscar had filmed me without my knowledge during what I thought were private moments, how he was using it to threaten me now that I'd left him, and Officer Williams typed everything up while explaining the legal process ahead. She said they'd need to get a warrant for Oscar's devices, that the case was strong with Helen and Rachel's testimony about his pattern, and she gave me a case number and her direct line before before walking me back to the waiting area. 3 hours had passed by the time we got to Helen's house, and I finally worked up the courage to text my dad while sitting in their guest room, typing out that I was safe, Oscar was gone, and I was sorry for everything I'd put him through. His response came within seconds, just asking if I wanted to get coffee tomorrow morning at our usual place. No questions, no anger, just that simple invitation that made me break down crying. Rachel had left a notebook on the nightstand, Monica's diary from when she dated Oscar 2 years ago, and as I read through the entries that night, I saw the exact same pattern: the isolation from her father, the jealousy over normal family interactions, the way Oscar twisted everything into something dirty. Monica wrote about missing her dad's birthday because Oscar said it was inappropriate for adult daughters to celebrate with their fathers, about Oscar monitoring her texts with family members, about the slow suffocation of every relationship that wasn't with him. The next morning, I met Dad at our coffee shop on Hennepin Avenue, and he looked thinner from the chemo, but his eyes were warm as he slid my usual vanilla latte across the table. He told me Olivia had called him after the barbecue, that she knew something was wrong with how I'd been acting, and I broke down completely, telling him everything about Oscar's accusations, about the threats, about the video, while he just held my hand and listened. When I finally stopped talking, Dad pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket and showed me pages of observations he'd been keeping since the barbecue, documenting my strange behavior, Oscar's controlling gestures, the way I'd flinch when Dad got near me. He said he and Mom had been planning an intervention, that they'd even contacted a domestic violence counselor for advice, but Helen had beaten them to it, and I realized my family had never believed Oscar's sick story for a second. As Dad reached for his wallet to pay, his chemotherapy schedule fell out onto the table, and I saw all the appointments he'd been going to alone while I was playing Oscar's twisted game, the treatments I should have been there for. The guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach, but Dad squeezed my shoulder and said I'd been protecting us both in my own way, that he understood I was trying to expose Oscar without direct confrontation. And that's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Oscar using someone else's phone, saying I had 24 hours to drop the police report, or he'd send the video to my workplace, to my LinkedIn connections, to everyone in my contact list. Before I could even process the threat, Helen texted me that Oscar had just sent the same message to Rachel, that they were screenshotting everything and adding it to the police file. And Officer Williams called within minutes saying they'd expedited the warrant based on the new threats. 2 days later, Helen drove me to meet with the lawyer she'd recommended, Patricia Kim, whose office was in a tall building downtown with security guards checking IDs at the entrance. How did Helen and Rachel know exactly what to do so fast? The way Rachel recognized that video type immediately, and Helen knew about the revenge porn laws, makes me wonder if they've helped other girls through this before with Oscar's past victims. Patricia had short gray hair and glasses that made her look serious as she spread out papers on her desk, showing screenshots of Oscar's messages and the police reports we'd filed. She explained that his threats counted as criminal coercion on top of the revenge porn charges, while highlighting sections of the law with a yellow marker and sliding forms across for me to sign. The next morning, going back to work felt weird, as I sat at my desk pretending everything was normal, while my coworkers chatted about weekend plans and complained about the coffee machine being broken again. During the marketing presentation about authentic customer relationships, I kept my phone face down on my lap, checking it every few minutes under the table, even though each buzz made my stomach drop. At lunch, Olivia called while I was eating a sad desk salad and told me she'd been doing some digging online and found out Oscar had messaged 3 of my coworkers on LinkedIn asking about my schedule and who I ate lunch with. My hands started shaking as she read me the screenshots she'd taken where he pretended to be planning a surprise for me, but was really trying to find out if I was dating anyone at work. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the afternoon jumping every time someone walked past my cubicle, wondering if my supervisor knew something since she'd been giving me weird looks all morning. That evening, Helen and Rachel picked me up from work to go back to the apartment and pack my stuff since I couldn't stay there anymore with Oscar having keys. The moment we walked in, I knew something was wrong because the photos on the wall were crooked and my laptop wasn't on the kitchen table where I'd left it. Rachel started taking pictures of everything, while Helen found a note stuck to the fridge that just said, "You have 48 hours," in Oscar's handwriting. Helen immediately called Officer Williams while I searched the apartment and realized my work laptop was gone, along with some USB drives and the external hard drive where I kept family photos. Mom showed up 20 minutes later, still wearing her hospital visitor badge from Dad's chemo appointment, and without saying anything, she just started folding my clothes into boxes with the same focused look she got when doing taxes. Rachel kept documenting everything with her phone, while Helen talked to the police and Mom packed with military precision, occasionally muttering under her breath about what she'd do if she got her hands on Oscar. The next morning, Officer Williams called to say they'd issued an arrest warrant for breaking and entering, theft, and criminal threats, but Oscar wasn't at his apartment or his job, and his phone was turned off. She said they were tracking his credit cards and checking with his known friends, but for now we just had to wait, which felt impossible when every noise outside made me freeze. I stayed at my parents' house trying to work on my laptop from their kitchen table, while Dad dozed on the couch between his treatments, and Mom installed new locks on all the doors. She'd also bought security cameras that she spent hours setting up, checking the angles from her phone and adjusting them until she could see every inch of the property. Making dinner that night felt surreal as Mom cooked spaghetti like it was any other Tuesday while I kept checking my phone, and Dad tried to act normal even though he was exhausted from chemo. Every car that drove past made me tense up, and I barely slept that night, lying in my childhood bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck on the ceiling in middle school. Rachel texted me urgently the next afternoon saying she'd found my laptop at Oscar's friend Derek's apartment, after Derek had called her confused about why Oscar had left it there. Derek hadn't known about any of the situation, and was horrified when Rachel explained, immediately agreeing to give a statement to the police about how Oscar had asked him to hold on to the laptop for a few days. When the police got the laptop back, they found Oscar had been trying to access my work email and and files, looking for proof that I was having an affair with a colleague named Marcus, who'd helped me with a project last month. Patricia filed for an emergency restraining order that afternoon, using all the new evidence of escalation, and the judge granted it immediately, though she warned me it was just a piece of paper if Oscar decided not to respect it. 3 days later, Dad insisted on going to his treatment appointment even though Mom wanted him to rest, and I went with him to the cancer center where we sat in uncomfortable chairs while chemicals dripped into his arm through an IV. While we waited, he talked about how getting cancer had taught him that avoiding problems didn't make them go away, and sometimes you had to stand up and fight even when you were scared. His hand was cold when he squeezed mine, and I could see he'd lost more weight, but his eyes were still determined as he told me I was doing the right thing by not letting Oscar control me anymore. The nurse came in to check Dad's IV, and I stepped outside to give them space when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Marcus, Oscar's best friend from college, and his voice sounded shaky as he explained that Oscar had showed up at his apartment completely drunk and wouldn't stop ranting about how I'd set him up and ruined his life. Marcus had started recording on his phone when Oscar began getting specific, admitting he'd taken my laptop from my apartment and describing in detail how he was going to destroy me piece by piece until I had nothing left. I could hear Oscar's slurred voice in the background of the recording Marcus played for me, the threats getting more graphic with each sentence. Marcus said he was driving Oscar back to his apartment right now and would call the police as soon as Oscar passed out on his couch, which based on how drunk he sounded would be any minute. I thanked Marcus and hung up just as Mom arrived with coffee from the cafeteria, her face lighting up when she saw Dad sitting up in bed looking stronger than he had in weeks. We spent the next few hours playing cards and watching old sitcom reruns on the tiny hospital TV, Dad making jokes about the terrible hospital food while Mom fussed over his blankets. Around 2 a.m., my phone rang again, and this time it was Janet, the detective handling my case, telling me they'd arrested Oscar at his apartment after Marcus called them with a recording. She said Oscar was being held on multiple charges, including violating the restraining order, breaking and entering, and theft of my laptop, which they'd found in his closet. The bail hearing was set for tomorrow afternoon, and Janet suggested I be there with my lawyer Patricia to present our evidence to the judge. I couldn't sleep after that call, just sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair watching Dad's chest rise and fall while mentally preparing for seeing Oscar again in court. The next afternoon, Patricia met me outside the courthouse with a thick folder of evidence, including the recording from Marcus, the security footage from my apartment building, and statements from Oscar's mom and sister about his pattern of behavior. Inside the courtroom, Oscar looked rough, unshaven with dark circles under his eyes, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. His lawyer argued for release, calling this a simple miscommunication in a relationship dispute and claiming Oscar posed no real threat to anyone. Patricia stood up and methodically presented each piece of evidence, playing the recording where Oscar explicitly threatened me, showing the judge photos of my ransacked apartment, and reading statements from multiple witnesses about Oscar's history of controlling behavior with previous girlfriends. The judge's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence Patricia presented, especially when she played the part of the recording where Oscar described his plans to systematically destroy my reputation and career. After 20 minutes of arguments, the judge set bail at $50,000 with strict conditions including GPS monitoring, no contact with me or my family, and mandatory anger management classes. As we left the courtroom, Helen approached me with tears in her eyes, grabbing my hands and apologizing over and over for not seeing what her son had become. She told me she'd thought each of his ex-girlfriends had been the problem, always believing Oscar's version of events where they were crazy or clingy or inappropriate with their families. She couldn't finish her sentence about not wanting to believe her son was capable of this, but her pain seemed genuine as she squeezed my hands one more time before walking away. A week later, Patricia called to tell me Oscar had made bail through a bondsman and was out with a GPS ankle monitor attached. She assured me any violation would send him straight back to jail, but I still installed extra locks on my apartment door and started staying with different family members each night, never posting on social media about where I was. Mom insisted I stay at their house most nights, setting up my old bedroom exactly how it was in high school with my stuffed animals still on the shelf. Things stayed quiet for about 2 weeks until my boss called me into his office looking uncomfortable, sliding a printed email across his desk that someone had sent to HR, claiming to be concerned about my mental stability. The email included screenshots from my social media that had been taken completely out of context, posts about being tired or stressed from Dad's cancer that were twisted to make me look unhinged and vindictive. HR suggested I take voluntary leave while things settled down, even though I explained the situation and showed them the restraining order and police reports. That same day, Olivia called me frantically, saying she'd been getting weird messages on Facebook from an account with my name and photo, but that definitely wasn't me. Patricia's yellow marker highlighting the law sections while explaining criminal coercion makes me wonder if she's done this exact presentation hundreds of times before. The way she slid those forms across her desk so smoothly suggests she has this whole process down to a science. The fake account was sending bizarre rambling messages to our extended family members and my professional contacts, each one carefully crafted to stay just within legal boundaries while making me look completely unstable. The messages referenced real events and included details only someone close to me would know, but twisted everything to paint me as paranoid and delusional. Olivia had already reported the accounts, but new ones kept popping up faster than Facebook could take them down, and the technical sophistication suggested Oscar had help from someone who knew what they were doing. I spent the next few days in my childhood bedroom scrolling through increasingly concerned messages from cousins asking if I was okay, and former colleagues wondering what was happening to me. Each fake message was more elaborate than the last, weaving complex stories about conspiracy theories and mental breakdowns that sounded just believable enough to make people worry. Mom brought me tea and sat silently beside me on my twin bed, rubbing my back while I showed her screenshot after screenshot of the fake account accounts, destroying my reputation piece by piece. 3 days later, Dad's oncologist called asking to speak with me urgently, explaining that someone claiming to be me had called to cancel all of Dad's upcoming chemotherapy appointments. The office manager had caught the discrepancy when the voice didn't quite sound right, and they'd called Dad directly to confirm, but he'd already missed one treatment session while they sorted out the confusion. My hands shook with rage as I realized Oscar was now actively interfering with Dad's cancer treatment, using his campaign against me to hurt the person I loved most in the world. Patricia immediately filed additional charges for harassment and impersonation, but explained that proving Oscar was behind the anonymous attacks would be nearly impossible since the fake accounts all used VPNs and were created from public Wi-Fi at coffee shops and libraries. The digital trail was too clean, too professional, suggesting Oscar had either learned these techniques himself or hired someone to execute his revenge while he maintained plausible deniability behind his GPS monitor. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee, and the caller ID showed my bank's fraud department. They explained someone had tried accessing my accounts 3 times overnight, using security questions about my first pet's name and the street I grew up on, things only Oscar would know since I'd filled out those forms with him when we'd merged some accounts months ago. The representative said they'd blocked the attempts but recommended I close everything and start fresh at a different bank entirely, which meant spending my whole morning dealing with automatic payments and direct deposits I'd forgotten existed. I was still on hold with my credit card company when Mom called to say a flower delivery had just arrived at their house. The bouquet was huge, all white roses and baby's breath, the exact same arrangement Oscar had brought to our first date, and the card just said, "Thinking of you during this difficult time, a concerned friend," in typed letters that could have come from anyone. Mom took photos of everything before tossing it all in the garbage, but we both knew it was him sending a message that he could still reach us even with that ankle monitor supposedly tracking his every move. 2 days later, Rachel showed up at my door carrying a banker's box full of folders and looking exhausted. She'd spent the past week tracking down Oscar's exes and gathering their stories, finding not just Monica and Kate, but also someone named Jennifer from 4 years ago, who none of us had ever heard about. Rachel spread the documents across my kitchen table, showing me police reports, restraining order applications, workplace complaints, and printed emails that all followed the same pattern of isolation, control, escalation, and then total destruction when each woman tried to leave. Jennifer's folder was the thickest, filled with evidence of how Oscar had systematically destroyed her nursing career with anonymous complaints to her licensing board about drug theft and patient abuse. None of it true, but enough to trigger investigations that made her unemployable. 2 weeks passed in this weird limbo of waiting for the next attack, and I finally decided to try going back to work just to feel normal for a few hours. But when I swiped my keycard at the office entrance, nothing happened, and the security guard looked uncomfortable as he explained there had been multiple concerning incidents reported about me, and I'd need clearance from HR before I could enter the building. The way he avoided eye contact and the pitying look he gave me made it clear that everyone in the building had heard something terrible about me, though I had no idea what Oscar had told them. That night, Olivia's husband Tom came over with his laptop, his face pale as he showed me what he'd discovered while trying to help secure my digital accounts. Oscar had installed something called Family Guard on my old laptop months ago, supposedly to protect us from hackers, but it was actually sophisticated tracking software marketed for parents monitoring their kids that recorded every keystroke, every password attempt, every website visit. Tom showed me logs of failed login attempts to my email, social media, even my online banking from IP addresses all over the city, like Oscar was systematically trying to break into every aspect of my digital life. The software was completely legal since I'd technically agreed to it when Oscar had me click through some terms and conditions he said were for antivirus protection, and now he had months of my data including passwords I'd since changed but whose patterns he could probably guess. 3 days later, I went with Dad to his chemotherapy appointment, trying to act normal and supportive while he got his IV drip, when another patient in the chair next to us leaned over and said she'd seen my posts in the Cancer Family Support Forum about how I was struggling with my father's inappropriate attachment to me during his treatment. I'd never posted anything anywhere, had never even heard of that forum, but when she showed me on her phone, there were dozens of posts under a username similar to mine, sharing twisted versions of real events from our family and making me sound completely delusional. Dad squeezed my hand and told me to ignore it, but I could see how much it hurt him that Oscar was using his cancer as a weapon against us. The real shock came the next morning when Helen called sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. Oscar had drained his entire trust fund, almost $200,000, and disappeared after cutting off his ankle monitor in a downtown parking garage. The security footage showed him getting into a car with someone, but the plates were deliberately obscured with mud, and the passenger wore a hoodie that hid their face. Patricia immediately filed for an emergency protection order, while the detective issued an arrest warrant. But we all knew Oscar had planned this carefully, and probably had new identification already. That afternoon, I completely fell apart in my parents' living room, sobbing about how I'd brought this monster into our lives and put everyone in danger. Dad pulled me close despite being weak from chemo and said firmly that I didn't bring Oscar anywhere because predators like him choose their targets, and there was a big difference between being targeted and being responsible. Olivia sat on my other side and added that we were going to end this together as a family, that Oscar had messed with the wrong people. The next morning, I was buying groceries, trying to maintain some normal routine, when a woman approached me near the produce section and introduced herself as Jennifer. She'd been following the news about Oscar's arrest and recognized his patterns from when he'd destroyed her life 4 years ago. She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of emails, texts, and forum posts from back then that looked exactly like what he was doing to me now, even using similar language and tactics. She offered to testify about his patterns if it would help, and gave me a flash drive with all her evidence from back then, saying she'd been waiting years for another victim to come forward forward so people would finally believe her. That evening, I was still processing Jennifer's story when my phone buzzed with an email from my company's HR department. They were terminating my employment effective immediately due to ongoing security concerns and reputational risks to the firm, with a severance that included 3 months' pay, but required signing a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of my departure. Patricia reviewed it and advised me to take the deal since we needed resources for what was coming, and fighting the termination would drain energy we needed for the criminal case. Jennifer arrived at Patricia's office the next morning with 3 boxes of documents. She spread everything across the conference table while Tom studied each page carefully. Oscar had used the same email formats for years. The fake accounts always followed patterns like first name, last name, 1, 2, 3, or initial number combinations. Tom started mapping connections between accounts and noticed Oscar recycled passwords across platforms. Within hours, he'd built a digital profile showing Oscar's online habits and weaknesses. Mom walked in carrying her own folder of research. She'd spent weeks calling Oscar's relatives and piecing together his history. His aunt had finally opened up about Oscar's dad being just as controlling before their divorce. There were juvenile records from when Oscar was 16 that got sealed. The aunt remembered police visits and restraining orders. Oscar's pattern went back over a decade. 3 days later, Rachel called with urgent news. Oscar actually planned his escape for months while pretending to follow the rules. The way he cut off his ankle monitor right when he'd drained $200,000 makes me wonder who helped him disappear so perfectly. She'd found a storage unit Oscar rented using a fake name 6 months ago. Security footage showed him visiting just last week carrying boxes inside. Janet got a warrant within hours while we all waited at the station. The storage unit manager met us there with bolt cutters. Inside, we found rows of banker boxes labeled with women's names. Each box contained printed emails, photos taken without permission, and detailed journals. Oscar had documented every text, every conversation, every perceived slight from his exes. The worst part was finding my box. It had entries dating back 2 months before we even met. He'd studied my social media, mapped my routines, planned exactly how to approach me at that bookstore. Pages detailed which insecurities to exploit and how to isolate me from family. Helen invited all of Oscar's victims to her house that weekend. Jennifer, Monica, Kate, and I sat in her living room comparing our experiences. We realized Oscar chose us using specific criteria. All of us avoided conflict, had close family bonds, and worked in careers where reputation mattered. He'd studied us like prey before making contact. Tom set up fake social media profiles matching Oscar's victim preferences the following week. Young women with conflict-avoidant personalities posting about family activities and professional achievements. Within 3 days, suspicious friend requests appeared from new accounts. The messages started friendly but quickly turned manipulative. Tom traced the IP addresses and confirmed Oscar was still hunting. Downtown Minneapolis got busy that Tuesday afternoon. Jennifer recognized the coffee shop immediately since Oscar had approached her there 5 years ago. Through the window, we saw him talking to a young woman who looked uncomfortable. I called Janet while Monica went inside to warn the woman discreetly. Oscar spotted Monica and bolted out the back door. Police arrived minutes later, but he'd vanished into the crowd. At least we knew he was still in the city. Dad finished his last chemo treatment that Friday. The oncologist said his numbers looked promising and recovery was going well. We sat in the hospital room while nurses removed his IV. He squeezed my hand and smiled despite everything we'd been through. Fighting Oscar had given us both strength in different ways. Patricia filed the civil suit the next week. She named Oscar for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and economic interference. With 4 victims ready to testify, we could establish his pattern of predatory behavior. The case would take months, but Patricia felt confident about our chances. Oscar made his biggest mistake 10 days later. Tom's monitoring software pinged when someone logged into one of the fake accounts. The IP address traced back to Derek's apartment across town. Derek had been Oscar's friend since college, but immediately called Tom when he realized what happened. Oscar was using Derek's Wi-Fi without permission while hiding at a motel nearby. Janet assembled a team within minutes. The motel sat on the outskirts of Minneapolis near the highway. We waited in the parking lot while officers surrounded the building. 20 minutes passed before Janet emerged from room 217 shaking her head. The bed was still warm, but Oscar had vanished through the bathroom window maybe 10 minutes before we arrived. Derek kept apologizing, but Tom told him it wasn't his fault. The officers bagged everything Oscar left behind, including a laptop, 3 burner phones, and stacks of printed emails scattered across the desk. Janet held up one of the pages showing messages between Oscar and someone signing themselves as V, discussing ways to hack my social media accounts and plant tracking software on my devices. The technical details made my stomach turn as I realized how long he'd been planning this. Back at the station, the cyber crimes unit started going through the laptop while I sat with Mom in the waiting area drinking terrible coffee. Helen arrived an hour later with Rachel, both looking exhausted and defeated. Helen pulled out her phone and started typing furiously, while Rachel explained that her mom had decided to do something drastic. Within minutes, Helen's Facebook post was live with Oscar's photo and a detailed warning about his pattern of abuse toward multiple women. She tagged every Minneapolis community group, every local news outlet, every domestic violence organization she could find. The post spread faster than wildfire with over 300 shares in the first hour alone. Rachel showed me the comments flooding in from other women who recognized Oscar from dating apps or bars where he'd made them uncomfortable. The next morning, I had to go back to my apartment for winter clothes since the temperature was dropping fast. Tom came with me but stayed in the hallway while I packed. Everything felt wrong in that space, like Oscar's presence had infected every corner. I grabbed sweaters from my closet when something caught my eye in the ceiling vent above my bed. My hands shook as I stood on a chair and unscrewed the vent cover. A small camera fell into my hands, its red recording light still blinking. The memory card inside showed footage dating back 6 months before the restraining order, before I'd even tried to leave him. 3 days later, Patricia called with news news that made everything worse. The cybercrimes unit had identified V as Vincent Smith, a former IT specialist who lost his job after stalking a coworker. Vincent ran an online forum for men who felt oppressed by feminist society, where Oscar was apparently a star member. The FBI took over the case immediately since Vincent lived in Wisconsin, and the cyber attacks crossed state lines. Patricia warned me this was getting bigger than just Oscar now. That afternoon, a local reporter named Sarah contacted Patricia saying Oscar had reached out to her station, claiming he was being framed by a conspiracy of vindictive women. Sarah had done her homework, though, finding the police reports and talking to Oscar's previous victims before calling Patricia for comment. Patricia put the call on speaker so I could hear Oscar's recorded interview where he admitted to checking on me through my devices and making sure I wasn't spreading lies about him. Sarah asked if we wanted to provide a statement, but Patricia said the recording spoke for itself. 2 days later, the FBI raided Vincent's apartment in Madison and hit the jackpot. Vincent had saved everything, including chat logs from a private forum where over 50 men shared tactics for surveilling, controlling, and punishing their ex-partners. Oscar's username appeared in dozens of conversations where he bragged about his methods and encouraged others to take back control from their exes. The agents found my personal information along with data on 17 other women being targeted by various forum members. The case exploded from a stalking charge to a federal investigation into organized criminal harassment. Patricia's office became command central as federal prosecutors arrived to build a RICO case against the entire network. Jennifer, Monica, and Kate joined me as key witnesses since Oscar had discussed all of us extensively in the forum. The prosecutors explained that this wasn't just about Oscar anymore, but about dismantling a whole system of coordinated abuse. We spent days giving statements and reviewing evidence that showed how these men had turned partner abuse into a structured operation with shared resources and strategies. Meanwhile, Mom had been busy organizing something of her own. She'd started a support group for families affected by Oscar's manipulation, meeting at the community center every Tuesday evening. 8 families showed up to the first meeting, including parents, siblings, and even Oscar's old roommate who felt guilty for not seeing the signs. Dad came too, and hearing other parents share their guilt about not protecting their kids sooner helped him stop blaming himself for not recognizing Oscar's behavior earlier. Everyone had stories about small red flags they'd dismissed or explained away. 2 weeks passed before Tom's decoy dating profiles got an interesting message. Oscar had created a new identity calling himself Marcus, but his writing style was unmistakable. He sent a message to one of the profiles saying, "I know what you're doing," followed by details only Oscar would know about the honey trap operation. Tom immediately forwarded everything to the FBI, who used the metadata to track Oscar's new location. Each time Oscar responded to the fake profiles, he gave them more data to narrow down his hiding spots. His ego wouldn't let him stay quiet even when he knew it was a trap. The investigation took another turn when the court unsealed Oscar's parents' divorce records from 15 years ago. The documents revealed that teenage Oscar had attacked Helen when she tried to leave his father, breaking her wrist and threatening worse if she went through with the divorce. His father had similar controlling behaviors that Oscar had clearly learned and perfected. The pattern of generational abuse became crucial evidence showing Oscar's violence wasn't new, but part of a long-term pattern that was escalating. Patricia connected me with Safe Haven 2 days later, and they wanted me to speak at their monthly awareness meeting. I stood in front of 30 people in a community center basement and just started talking about the small things that seemed normal at first. How Oscar would check my phone while I was sleeping, how he'd show up at my work unexpectedly with lunch but really to see who I was eating with, how he'd get quiet when I mentioned male coworkers and then pick fights about unrelated things later. The room was dead silent as I explained how these tiny red flags grew into him trying to isolate me from my dying father. Someone recorded it on their phone and posted it online that night. The camera hidden in her ceiling vent recorded her for 6 months before she even tried to leave. That's so much planning and watching. How did Oscar know exactly where to put it to see everything in her room? By morning, it had 20,000 views. By the next afternoon, it hit 50,000 with comments from women sharing similar stories. Vincent Williams saw that video from his jail cell, and his lawyer called Patricia within hours. He wanted to make a deal. He knew where Oscar was hiding because the whole network had safe houses for when things went bad. Oscar was at a cabin near Duluth that belonged to another member who went by the username Red Pill King. The arrest team moved at 4 in the morning 3 days later. Oscar had dyed his hair black and grown a beard, but they found him with 30,000 in cash, 4 fake IDs with different names, and a detailed plan for crossing into Canada through International Falls. He fought them hard enough that they had to use a taser. The prosecutor's office called me in the next day to review evidence for the trial. Box after box of stuff they'd taken from his apartment and storage unit. Thousands of photos of me that I never knew he'd taken. Me at the grocery store. Me walking to my car after work. Me through my bedroom window. Pages and pages of notes about my daily routine. My family members, my friends, every detail of my life mapped out like a research project. The prosecutor, a woman named Janet, put her hand on mine when I started shaking. "This was never about you," she said quietly. "You were just the current target. Men like this pick their victims based on opportunity, not personal connection." The bail hearing happened that week, and the judge denied it immediately based on flight risk and community danger. Oscar's lawyer tried arguing for psychiatric evaluation to build an insanity defense, saying his client needed mental health treatment, not jail. Patricia warned me this could delay everything by months, but we had no choice but to wait. The evaluation was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The psychiatrist asked Oscar about his childhood, his relationships, his father. When the doctor mentioned his dad's controlling behavior toward Helen, Oscar lunged across the table and grabbed the man by the throat. 2 guards had to pull him off. The whole thing was caught on the evaluation room camera. The psychiatrist testified later that Oscar showed no signs of mental illness, just extreme need for control and willingness to use violence to get it. The insanity defense died right right there. While all this legal stuff dragged on, I needed to work. A company that makes security software had followed my story and reached out through LinkedIn. They wanted someone who understood real-world crisis management from personal experience. The position was entry-level, way below my old job, but it was something. Mom cried when I told her I'd accepted it. "You're rebuilding," she said. "That's all that matters." 2 weeks later, Dad finished his last round of chemo. The scan results were good, really good, and we had dinner at his favorite steakhouse to celebrate. He stood up with his water glass and looked around at all of us, to fighting the battles that matter and knowing which ones those are. Everyone raised their glasses, and I saw Olivia wipe her eyes. We felt closer than we'd ever been, like going through hell had welded us together stronger. The pretrial hearings started the next month at the federal courthouse downtown. Oscar looked thin and pale in his orange jumpsuit, constantly whispering to his lawyer and scanning the gallery. Then he saw us in the third row. Me, Jennifer, Monica, and Kate all sitting together. His face went red and he jumped up screaming that we were conspiring bitches who'd planned this whole thing. The bailiffs dragged him out while his lawyer tried to apologize to the judge. 2 weeks after that, Helen took the stand. She described watching Oscar's behavior escalate over the years, seeing the warning signs but telling herself it was just protectiveness or stress from work. She talked about finding his notebooks about his ex-girlfriends, the detailed plans for controlling them, the rage when they left. Her voice broke when she admitted she'd failed those girls by not speaking up sooner. Oscar stared at her with such pure hatred that the judge ordered 2 extra officers to stand between them. Then came the moment that changed everything. Oscar's lawyer stood up and announced their defense strategy. They were claiming I'd seduced and manipulated Oscar from day one, that I'd orchestrated the entire situation to get access to his family's money. They even had a witness ready to testify, someone from Oscar's network who'd supposedly seen me researching the family's finances before we'd even met. The prosecutor stood up and called their witness to the stand, some guy named Derek who worked at Oscar's company 3 years ago. Derek started strong, claiming he'd seen me at a coffee shop near their office, Googling Oscar's family trust fund details on my laptop. The prosecutor let him talk for 5 whole minutes before pulling out security footage from that exact coffee shop on that exact date. Derek's face went white when the screen showed him in Florida that week at a work conference. The FBI agent sitting in the front row stood up and Derek started shaking. Within 10 minutes, Derek admitted Oscar had promised him $50,000 to lie. The judge ordered Derek arrested right there in the courtroom for perjury and witness tampering. Oscar's lawyer looked sick. Rachel took a stand next and spent 2 hours walking the jury through Oscar's history. She brought yearbooks showing 3 different girlfriends from high school who all mysteriously moved away mid-semester. She had copies of the restraining order his college roommate filed after Oscar installed hidden cameras in their dorm. She showed termination papers from his first job where HR documented him following a coworker home repeatedly. The jury took notes as Rachel listed 20 years of escalating behavior that everyone had ignored or excused. That night, I couldn't sleep knowing I'd testify tomorrow. Dad sat with me on the couch holding my hand while I stared at the ceiling. He told me about waiting for his biopsy results and how scared he'd been. We both knew about facing things that terrified us. The next morning, I threw up twice before getting to court. I testified for 4 straight hours, walking through every text, every threat, every time Oscar broke into my apartment. Oscar's lawyer tried to make me look vindictive, but Patricia's redirect questions let me explain the truth. I just wanted to support my dying father without Oscar's interference. Tom from the FBI's cybercrimes unit testified after me with 3 laptops and a projector. He showed the jury every fake account Oscar and Vincent created, every GPS tracker they installed, every spoofed phone number they used. The digital trail was massive with timestamps proving Oscar spent 8 to 10 hours daily monitoring and harassing his victims. Monica testified next about swallowing a bottle of pills after Oscar's fake complaints cost her the nursing job she'd worked 10 years to get. Kate cried, describing how child services took her daughter for 3 weeks after Oscar filed false abuse reports with doctored photos. Jennifer explained moving from Seattle to Phoenix to Miami trying to escape him. The prosecutor then wheeled in 3 boxes from Oscar's storage unit. Inside were trophies from each victim, including my grandmother's bracelet I thought I'd lost, Monica's nursing school pin, a drawing Kate's daughter made that disappeared from their fridge, and Jennifer's college diploma she thought got lost in a move. The jury stared at the collection of stolen items laid out on the evidence table. During the lunch break, a woman approached me in the hallway. She said Oscar had started talking to her at the same coffee shop where I'd met him. She was going through a divorce, and Oscar seemed so understanding at first. She thanked me for saving her from whatever would have happened. We hugged, and I felt her shaking. Oscar took the stand that afternoon against his lawyer's advice. He claimed we were all crazy ex-girlfriends who couldn't handle rejection and had conspired to frame him. He said the videos were consensual, the break-ins were him retrieving his belongings, and the fake accounts were just him protecting his reputation. The prosecutor's cross-examination lasted 3 hours. Oscar admitted taking videos without consent, but said women should expect that in relationships. He admitted breaking into my apartment, but claimed he had a right to check on me. He admitted creating fake social media accounts, but insisted it was normal to monitor girlfriends online. He justified every crime as protecting himself from female manipulation. His own lawyer put his head in his hands as Oscar kept talking, digging himself deeper with every answer. The judge finally stopped him and sent the jury out while the lawyers gave their closing arguments. The prosecutor stood up and walked right to the jury box, pointing at Oscar while she talked about how he saw women as things to own, not people with their own lives. She showed them the pattern with all his ex-girlfriends, the fake accounts, the break-ins, everything that proved this wasn't about love, but about control and punishment when women tried to leave him. Oscar's lawyer tried to make him look like some sad guy who just got carried away after being dumped, but nobody was buying it when there were so many victims and so much evidence. The jury went to deliberate and came back in just 3 hours. While we waited, my phone started blowing up with texts from Patricia and the other women. 2 more girls from Oscar's high school had seen the news coverage and contacted the FBI about stuff he did to them back then. The prosecutors couldn't add those to this case but announced they were opening new investigations. We all met up at Helen's house to wait for the verdict together since the courthouse was too crowded and reporters kept trying to talk to us. How did Tom from the FBI figure out that Oscar spent exactly 8 to 10 hours every single day watching his victims online? The way the jury stared at those stolen trophies makes me wonder if they understood right away what those items really meant to each woman. Helen kept saying she was sorry over and over, but Patricia held her hand and told her none of this was her fault. Monica brought coffee and Kate brought sandwiches nobody could eat because we were all too nervous. Rachel sat with us too, sharing more stories about warning signs she'd missed with Oscar growing up. When the call came that the jury was back, we rushed to the courthouse. The judge read it out loud, and Oscar was guilty on everything: stalking, harassment, criminal threats, breaking and entering, theft of property, revenge porn, conspiracy to commit fraud, witness tampering, and 3 more charges I couldn't even process. Oscar just stared straight ahead, but I could see his hands shaking on the table. The judge set sentencing for next month, and Oscar got taken back to jail. Over the next week, the FBI arrests kept happening. 17 guys from that network Oscar was part of got picked up across 5 states. The story went national, and suddenly everyone was talking about digital stalking laws. 3 states changed their revenge porn laws because of our case. Dad called me crying when he saw it on the news, proud of me for fighting back. Then he had even better news at his 6-month scan. The cancer was in remission. We went to his favorite restaurant to celebrate, just the 2 of us, and he grabbed my hand across the table. He told me I saved him too by showing him how to fight when things got hard. At the sentencing hearing, we all got to read victim impact statements. Patricia went first and talked about losing her job and having to move 3 times. Monica talked about the therapy she still needs. Kate talked about not being able to trust anyone anymore. Helen stood up last and read a letter she wrote to Oscar, saying the son she raised died the day he chose to hurt women instead of respecting them. That's when Oscar finally lost it, screaming that we'd destroyed his life and ruined everything for him. The judge had to have the guards hold him down while he kept yelling about conspiracies and how we'd all planned this. The judge didn't care about his tantrum and gave him 15 years in federal prison with no chance of early release. He also got lifetime registration as a stalker and permanent restraining orders for all of us. Oscar got dragged out still muttering about how this wasn't fair and we'd all pay for this. Walking out of the courthouse, I didn't feel happy or relieved, just empty. This whole thing had taken over my life for months, and now it was done. Patricia walked next to me and reminded me that getting justice was just the first step, and the real work of healing would take time. 3 days later, Helen called and asked if I'd come to her house because the other women Oscar had hurt wanted to meet one more time before we all tried to move forward with our lives. Monica was there with her nursing textbooks spread across Helen's coffee table. Kate had brought photos of her kids who she finally had full custody of again, and Jennifer showed us her engagement ring from the guy she'd been too scared to date while Oscar was stalking her. We exchanged phone numbers, but all knew we needed space from each other to really heal, since seeing each other would always bring back memories of what we'd survived together. Helen made sandwiches, and we ate mostly in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts about how one man had derailed so many lives. But when we hugged goodbye at the door, we all knew we'd made it through the worst and could finally start living again. That night, I went back to my apartment for the first time since the arrest, and every corner held a memory that made my skin crawl. The couch where we'd watched movies before I knew what he was. The kitchen where he'd made breakfast while planning to destroy my family. The bedroom where I'd trusted him with everything. I called my landlord the next morning and gave notice because this place would always be his, no matter how much I cleaned or redecorated. 2 weeks later, I started my new job at a marketing firm downtown, and when my manager asked about the gap in my resume, I told her the truth about the stalking and the trial. She nodded and said they'd had another employee go through something similar, and if I ever needed to leave for court stuff or therapy, just let her know. Then she showed me to my desk and treated me like any other new hire, which was exactly what I needed. Dad and I started getting coffee again every Thursday morning at our old spot, but now we talked about real stuff instead of just work and weather. He told me about the fear he'd felt during chemo, how he'd wanted to call me but respected the distance Oscar had forced between us, how guilty he felt for not seeing the warning signs sooner. I told him about the terror of living with someone who monitored my every move, the relief when his family finally saw the truth, the emptiness I felt now that the fight was over. We both had cancer stories now, his physical and mine emotional, and somehow that made us closer than we'd ever been before. The support group for stalking survivors met every Tuesday in a church basement, and after my 3rd meeting, the facilitator asked if I'd consider being a peer mentor, since I was one of the few who'd gotten real justice. Most of the others had restraining orders that got violated, cases that got dismissed for lack of evidence, or were still trapped with their stalkers because the system hadn't caught up to modern technology and tactics. I started sharing my story with new members, teaching them how to document everything, how to build a case, how to stay safe while gathering evidence. Mom surprised everyone by starting a nonprofit called Shield Network that connected stalking victims with resources, using her old military contacts to create safe houses and her logistics background to coordinate legal aid and therapy services. Dad became her biggest supporter, handling the finances and going with her to fundraising events. Their marriage stronger than ever after surviving both his cancer and my crisis. 6 months after the trial, Patricia forwarded me a letter from Oscar that had come to her office from the prison. She'd already filed it with authorities as a violation of the no-contact order, which would add time to his sentence, but she wanted me to know he was still blaming everyone else and showing no remorse. I felt nothing reading his words about how we'd all conspired against him and ruined his life, just filed it away mentally as proof I'd made the right choice in exposing him. Olivia and I started having sister dinners every Sunday where we'd cook together and talk about everything we'd been too scared to discuss before. She admitted she'd noticed Oscar getting controlling early on, but didn't know how to bring it up without seeming jealous or petty, and we developed a code word system, so if either of us ever felt unsafe, we could signal for help without alerting anyone dangerous. 8 months after the trial, we threw Dad a party for being cancer-free for a full year, and I realized halfway through dinner that I hadn't thought about Oscar in weeks. The checking over my shoulder had faded, the jumping at unexpected texts had stopped, and I could trust people again, though I was definitely more careful about red flags. I was pouring coffee for Dad at our usual Thursday spot when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and for the first time my heart didn't race. It was just someone who'd gotten the wrong number looking for a pizza place, and when I smiled and deleted it, Dad noticed my calm reaction. "You've really moved on," he said, and I realized he was right because Oscar had stolen months of my life but not my ability to live it. The war I'd chosen was over, and I'd won not by destroying him, but by rebuilding everything he'd tried to take away. Alright friends, that's where we'll wrap it up. It's been such a fascinating journey wondering and exploring together. Until next time, like the video. It helps more than you think.